Lord, I know these people ain't seen me in a while, but I ask that you would help me through this podcast. Give me words. In Jesus' name, amen.
Charity and make whatever, from your fashion to your comfort. Anything you need, know she got it covered. It's like magic. Never doubt the passion, thread the work, never lacking. Take notes, needle mover out of habit. Knit girl magic.
Hey y'all, and welcome to the Knit Girl Magic podcast. This is episode 6. This is a podcast all about knitting. My name is Charity, and I am from a small town in North Carolina where I live with my husband, our 2 children, and I work here as a teacher, but I'm out for the summer. You would think that I would have more time to get in front of the camera and talk to you about my knitting because I'm on summer vacation, but I don't. This summer I'm catching up on all the projects as well as trying to get rid of all the germs we picked up from school. I've had a head injury. I've had ant bites from being out in the yard. It's just been an adventure. But I am here now, and thank you so much for taking the time to watch this episode. If you're new here, welcome. I'm so glad to have you. And if you're returning, thank you for being a part of the chaos that this is. I want to jump right into knits, and then if any life things come up, we'll just let those happen organically. So the first thing that I want to talk about is obviously something that I'm wearing. So on the last couple of episodes, you will know that I started a sweater experiment, kind of accidentally, where I wanted to see what the difference would be if I used a superwash merino yarn and then a non-superwash yarn while knitting the same sweater. So the sweater that I'm wearing is the Harlow Sweater, and it's by designer Caidree. I knit this one, and I knit an identical gray one. The one that I'm wearing is a non-superwash yarn. It is from Lion brand. Let me see if I can find the tag. Oh, yep, I have it here. It's in Lion brand Fisherman's wool. And it is 100% wool, non-superwash wool. And it is very, very woolly, as you can probably see through the camera. Maybe you can see. The other sweater that I knit is 100% superwash merino wool. And this one is in the color Gris. It's yarn by Malabrigo, Rios. This is their worsted weight. And this one is, I guess it's worsted weight. It doesn't really say, but they seem to be about the same weight. And the color of this one is oak tweed. This yarn, and I do have quite a bit of it left, I ordered 3 of these balls or skeins, whatever you want to call them. And it has just like a brown strand of yarn kind of interwoven. And so it gives you a stripy look when it's inside of the skein, and then when you knit it up, it kind of gives a marled look. I'll come a little bit closer so you can see. And I like it. I'm here for it. At first, it was a little bit busy for me, but I'm really enjoying it now. And I think that I can style it with black, maybe. In the winter, I've got on black shorts. I kind of like the breaking the rules and putting the brown and the black together. The last time I talked to you about this sweater, these sweaters, I'll probably say that interchangeably, was around March. That's the last time I've been here. And I've been working on them the whole time. I think I finally finished them, so this is July, probably mid-July. It just took a long time. Because, like I said, I'm a teacher, I'm a mom, I'm super busy, and I don't want knitting to be at the forefront, in my life with my family. I want it to be an outlet for me and not totally take over. So I knit when I can, and I don't obsess over it. I'll finish things when I finish them. And it took me, almost 5 months, because today is July something or another. It's the end of July. It's taken me a long time to finish. But I am very happy with the results of this sweater and that one. So let me get into specifics. In terms of knitting experience, I want to talk about the two sweaters, along 4 points. So the first one is knitting experience. Knitting with this was probably more enjoyable than knitting with the Superwash yarn. The non-Superwash yarn, I picked this one up more, and I think it was because it being undyed, I knew that I did not have to worry about what do you call it when the colors kind of go together? Color pooling. I knew that I didn't have to worry about that. I mean, this sweater is very busy in itself, so I could knit with one skein at a time, and I didn't have to do helical knitting or alternate skeins or anything like that. So this was the sweater that I would pick up and knit up more often than the other one. In terms of how it felt to knit with, it was fine. Of course, it felt more rustic, but I enjoyed that. I love the smell of it. It just smells like sheep, and I love that. It still smells like that after washing. I love the rusticness. I love the scratchiness. I love the feel of it while knitting. Then the gray one, and I'll hold it up so you can see this one, and I might put it on too, kind of midway through this podcast. This one was obviously more soft to knit with. It being superwash yarn, the process that they use to dye this yarn, it just makes it super soft. It's merino, and that makes it soft too. So when I knit with this, I felt it was just like a warm hug. Like, it was super cozy to knit with this one, and wearing it obviously is super cozy also. But this one I picked up less often, and I finished this one last because of the helical knitting. And helical knitting is what you do when you don't want pools of color. When I got this yarn, I noticed that each skein varied in color. Subtle differences, but they were noticeable. So there were some skeins that were lighter, some skeins that were darker, and so I knew that I needed to alternate skeins just to kind of get some consistency with the look of the sweater. And so I used helical knitting. And for helical knitting, it's really not difficult. It's just more work. So you knit up to, you add in your second skein of yarn anywhere in the round. And then when you get close to that yarn, which for me, I did 3 stitches away from that yarn, you drop the current ball of yarn that you're using, you slip the next 3 stitches to your knitting needle, and then you pick up the new yarn. And it's as easy as that, but it just takes managing the balls of yarn. And for me, if I had a long day, or if, my toddler's running around, I called her the yarn snatcher, she still is, that was harder for me to manage, just managing the yarn. So this one I finished last. Now, would I do it again? Of course I would. I would use the superwash yarn again. I would do helical knitting again. Just keeping in mind that there's a little bit of extra work with helical knitting. So, point 2 is the feel of both of these yarns when wearing them. So this yarn, being 100% wool, non-superwash, no other added fibers, that's the word, fibers, in it, is way more scratchy than this sweater, obviously, and that was expected. But I'm pleasantly surprised at how comfortable it does feel. It reminds me of the sweater that I knit, my very first sweater. I used Drops Flora, one strand of that, and I held that together with some mohair. And it just feels like that. It doesn't feel any more scratchy than that. And the place where I feel it the most, that's the most sensitive to it, is around my neck. But it's wearable, just like my mohair sweater. The longer that I wear this sweater, the more comfortable it feels, and I start to notice it less. So I do feel like I can knit more of these non-superwash sweaters and be totally fine and totally comfortable. And that's exciting news because this yarn was so much more budget friendly than the superwash yarn. I bought 3 of these skeins of yarn, and I think I probably paid less than $40 for all of them. And my Malabrigo yarn, I bought 7 skeins of these, and I think I spent around $120. So just with the price point, I know I jumped into price point, but I'm really excited that I can wear a sweater like this if I want to go easy on my budget. And then obviously this one feels like butter. You know, it's a dream to wear. I'm super comfy in it, and you know, that's really all there is to say about that. The only place I wouldn't wear this yarn is on my head. That would be way too itchy. Like, I can deal with it being on my body, but I don't like my head being itchy at all. All right, point number 3. I thought I had 4 points, but well, I guess I went into the price. The last point I want to make about these sweaters are the changes after blocking. And that's why I started this experiment in the first place. I didn't knit 2 of the same sweater just because I felt like knitting 2 of the same sweater, because I mean it took a long time. But initially, if you remember, if you've watched before, when I purchased the yarn for this sweater, I purchased it with the suggestion, or with a lot of influence from the lady at the yarn store, at my local yarn store. Typically when I look at patterns, I try to find a yarn or a fiber that matches what the pattern calls for. I try to go as close to the suggested yarn in the pattern as I can. But when I saw this yarn, it just looked so beautiful in the skein, and it just called to me, and the lady at the yarn shop was like, well, just use it. And it really terrified me. Once I got home, I had a lot of anxiety about if I spent months knitting this sweater. I was afraid that it would grow like down to my knees, because I just felt like I'd heard horror stories of that happening. So I decided to keep this yarn and just kind of see what would happen, because that would be a great learning experience to see if I could knit a sweater with superwash yarn in the future. And then I decided to purchase this yarn secondly to see if I would get better results. And so in terms of the results, I did make notes because I just want to make sure that I, give all of my thoughts. So this sweater, the gray one, the Gris one, that's the colorway. I probably didn't say that. But anyway, I measured it before blocking and I measured it after blocking. And I took 3 measurements. So for the first one, I measured from the back collar all the way to the bottom hem, so the length. And before blocking, and I won't go into the exact measurements because that would take a lot of time, but before blocking and after blocking, the sweater grew in length from the back collar to the hem about 1 1/4 inches. 1 1/4 inches. So it didn't grow like the 15 inches that I thought it would. And that's exciting. That's very exciting. I was nervous though when I first blocked it, because looking at it on the mat drying, when you first allow it to take in all that water, it is huge. And I thought, oh my God, my nightmare has come true. I'm not going to be able to wear this sweater. But the more it dried out in 90-degree weather, and it didn't take long at all, the more it kind of shrunk back up to not its original length, but it kind of reverted back to what it was supposed to be. So that was good to know. And then I measured the width from right up under the underarm to the other side, and it grew. Actually, I don't remember what that measurement was because I had blocked half of this last time just to see what it was like. And so from here down, from here to the underarm, it was actually blocked 2 times. So with the second blocking, I didn't see any growth because it had already grown a little before in width, but I don't remember the exact measurement. And then I measured the arms because I just wanted to make sure that I'd be able to wear it and, you know, it wouldn't be hanging way down here. And so the arm grew about 1.5 inches each arm. So that was good news. I mean, it did grow, but it didn't grow so much that it's unwearable. And I'm very excited about that. And that tells me that I can knit sweaters in Superwash Merino if I want to. I'll knit them if I want to, and it'll be fine. And then in terms of like the bust circumference that the pattern called for, I'm maybe just like 1/2 inch off, or maybe 1 inch off in terms of what it's supposed to be for E. So it's a little larger than I wanted it, but not too much. So that's exciting. And then I also took the measurements for this one because I wanted to, you know, see what the difference would be. And for the non-superwash sweater, it did not grow. And what's really cool is that when I did my swatch, if you remember, I was like, it's shrunk. You know, what's happening here? It's shrunk. So for this one, I decided to knit a larger size, a medium, because I knew that it shrunk. And it was a good decision because when I measured this one, the length from the back collar to the hem, it shrunk about 1/4 inch. So my swatch did not lie. I was really excited about that. And then the width, it did grow a little bit in the width. So that makes sense. If it got shorter, then it got a little wider, but only about 1/4 inch. So it wasn't much change at all. And then for the arm, those did grow. The sleeves did grow about 3/4 of an inch. So I had the most growth with the sleeves. But as you can tell, they're the perfect length. Like, I don't mind when my sleeves do this, and in fact I can pull them to do that, you know, to cover my fingers. But it's kind of perfect, like it hits right here at my wrist. Yeah. Let me try on the other sweater just so you can see. And I will say before I do that, my favorite part of the design of this sweater, if you decide to knit this sweater, is this little detail along the back. I love it. It's an I-cord. You know, I don't want to give too many details about the pattern, but I will say that it's an I-cord, and it's how you start your sweater, just from this little braid. Favorite part of the sweater. Like, I just turn around when I'm wearing it and look at that. All right, let me go change into this one. Okay, so this is sweater number 2. I love the way the sleeves grew on this one so much that it just automatically covers part of my hand, and that just feels so cozy to me. Let me see if I can turn around. Ah, look at that. It's my favorite. It's my favorite part of this sweater. I'll try to come back a little bit. This is very awkward. But as you can see, the sweater is totally wearable. I can't really get any higher than that. It works. It works, and I love it. And this one is super duper cozy. Super duper cozy, super duper soft. I think my favorite part of this one, other than the I-cord on the back, is the collar. I opted for the folded collar on this one, and I really love how that came out. Very neat looking. The only changes that I made for these sweaters, I knit them totally to pattern, other than the length. For the sleeves, I just kind of stop knitting when I feel like knitting, when I feel like stopping. Kind of the same for the hem also. Let me quit standing up. You can't see down there. I just kind of stop knitting when I feel like stopping. So that might, well, usually that means it's shorter than what it calls for in the pattern, because I'm a pretty short person. I am 5'3". So I figure that whoever writes these patterns write them for the average height of a woman or a person, whoever's going to wear them. And so I might shorten things a little bit, and still things can be kind of long on me. So I did that. Oh, I did modify the bind off. So I kind of did a mixture. So the pattern calls for you to use an Italian bind off, and I did that for, I don't even remember which parts. I did it for parts of the sweater, but then I wanted to try the tubular bind off, and I enjoyed doing that a lot better. I could remember it a lot easier. It just felt right to me. So when I figured out how to do the tubular bind off, there was no looking back. I know I did that bind off for the sleeves and maybe the bottom hem. I may have like done an Italian bind off on the front hem and a tubular on the back. Either way, they look the same. So it gives you this nice rounded edge. There are places where I messed up, but overall, I think I did a good job there, and I'll continue to do the tubular bind off. And that's it. Those are my sweaters. My Harlow sweater by Caidree. I love it. I love the drop shoulder design of a sweater. I think that's just it for me. I have knit, what's the one where you knit in the round? I mean, it's all in the round, but for the drop sweaters, you start by knitting them flat. The drop shoulder sweaters. Raglan. I have knit a raglan, but I really enjoy drop shoulder constructions for sweaters. The only thing I don't like about it is all the ends that need to be woven in at the end, because you start off knitting flat and you'll just stop and pick up your yarn and start knitting in another place. There's a lot of ends to weave in. I don't enjoy weaving in ends. I'm really lazy. And then for this sweater, because I did helical knitting and I was alternating skeins, there were even more ends to weave in. So it did take me longer just to do the finishing touches on these sweaters, because I don't like weaving in ends. All right, so my next finished object, because it has been a while, is a pair of socks. These are what I'm going to call my Irish socks. And the reason I'm going to call them that is because my brother and my sister-in-law back in March, I think, went to Ireland. And they are the sweetest people. Well, my brother is my twin brother, so I'm obviously going to just speak so highly of him. But they were so sweet, because they went and they bought all of their siblings a little gift when they went to Ireland, and they did not have to do that. And they made it personal for each person. And for me, they found a local yarn store, y'all. I would do that, but for people who don't knit to do that, that was just so special. That was so special, so sweet of them. And they bought me this yarn in Ireland, and that was just wonderful. And the fact that they knew what color to get and the kind of yarn to get was just amazing. They got me one skein of sock yarn. It was called Life in the Long Grass. And I have never actually looked at the colorway until right now. So I would try to pronounce it. I'll try. Spharia? I have no idea. That's the colorway. But it is 75% superwash merino and 25% nylon. So they got me sock yarn, and she knew I loved I assume that my sister-in-law did the most thinking about it, but she knows that I love to knit socks, so she got me sock yarn. And I knit these socks. I don't block my socks ever. This is just how they end up looking in the end. And what I've decided to do is gift her with these socks. And I started these in April, finished them in June, so April 15th to June 9th. And I've been holding on to these this long. It's the end of July now. And I can't wait to give them to her. But I wanted to show them to you. They're so soft, very beautiful. And my husband, being the sweet man that he is, for Mother's Day, bought me some little tags so that I can put them on my knits. And it looks so cute on this one. So it says Knit Girl Magic right there on the tag. And I just think that's a lovely little detail to add to my knits, especially when I'm going to gift them to someone. So thank you, Bae. I call him Bae, and so my toddler also calls him Bae. I think that's very funny. But thank you to my sister-in-law for gifting me with this yarn, and I'm happy to gift it right back to her so that she can have something cozy to wear on her feet this winter. And I do have tons of it left over. My goodness. So I'll use this in something scrappy so that I'll still have a memory of the Irish sock yarn that they gave me. All right, so I've talked about my sweaters, that pair of socks. The last thing that I finished that I want to share is a Musselburgh hat. It is, oh, by the way, for these socks, I always knit them, I use 64 stitches, which is a size medium according to like the first pair of knit socks that I ever made, which is a pattern from the Crazy Sock Lady. I knit these on size 2.25 millimeter needles, and I always use my Caidree red lace for socks these days. Yeah, size medium. That's important because these are socks that I'm making for someone else, and I asked my brother what the shoe size is for my sister-in-law, and we wear the same size, so I knit them the same size that I would for me. Okay, now moving on to the Musselburgh hat. I knit a Musselburgh hat, and you can see the tube here. I ran out of yarn. I played a little yarn chicken and lost. And this pattern is by Ysolda Teague. And it's one that if you watch a lot of podcasters, I'm sure you've seen this. It's basically a hat where you start at the top and you start knitting in the round in a circle. And you do increases until you until you have enough to check for gauge. And so the cool thing about this pattern is when it comes to gauge, whatever gauge you come up with, you knit the hat based on that gauge. So I think I had about 7 or 8 stitches per inch in my gauge, and then I chose the size that I wanted to make based on that gauge, and the pattern told me how many stitches to use to achieve the size that I wanted. That's the cool thing about the Musselburgh pattern, is that gauge matters, but you do it based off of your gauge. You knit it based off of your gauge. And this is the second one that I knit. So you knit, you increase, and then you just knit in the round for what feels like forever, until you get it to the length that it calls for in the pattern, and then you start decreasing at the end. And so this, I think, the first hat that I ever knit was a Musselburgh hat, and it was perfect for me because at that time I hadn't done any increases, and so I learned how to make increases when I made my first hat, and I'm going to show that in just a second. And then I was very comfortable with decreases because I had already knit socks. But this is the first one that I ever made. It's still a tube. I just tucked it in, so I'm not going to untuck it. Okay, I will. So you knit the tube, and then to make it wearable, you take one side and you tuck it into the other. It's hard to do on camera, so I'll have to start it in my lap, and then I'll kind of show you. I'm just tucking one end into the other. And then you get a hat that you can wear on your head. And the cool thing about it is it's double layered now because you tucked that one part, half of it, into the other. So it's super warm. All right. And the yarn that I used for this version, oh, let me see if I can find it. It's way over there. Hold on. Okay, I found the yarn that I used. So the yarn that I used for this one is Malabrigo, because I was obsessed around the time that I was purchasing all this yarn. And it's their Arroyo. Aiden would be so much better at pronouncing these words in Spanish for me. But this one is sport weight instead of the worsted weight that I used for this one. Sport weight, and it is 100% superwash merino wool. And the color for this one is Sandbank. Sandbank. And now that you look at that, that makes a whole lot of sense. Alright, so I knit the size large for this one because I have a big old head. So the bigger the better in terms of hats for me, especially when my hair is curly. Right now my hair is in twists, so it's not quite as big, but when my hair is curly, I need a big old hat. So I knit a size large. But because I ran out of yarn, I didn't knit it to the length that it called for in the pattern. So it's much, much shorter than my original one. And I don't know, I think just because I use different yarn, the gauge is a little tighter also. So it's a little tighter fitting on my head. But because this is 100% superwash merino, I think that I can stretch it with blocking, and that will help. So, and then the cool thing about playing yarn chicken with a Musselburgh hat is because you're going to just tuck one end into the other, you can use whatever color you want at the end. And so I had some leftover yarn that I used for my Sophie scarf that I made a few months ago. It was a sport weight, so I used that. I thought I ran out of that. Turns out I didn't. I just found some today. And I used a fingering weight at the end. But either way, it works. All you do is tuck it in and you can't even see it. So that is my Musselburgh hat. I will probably knit a ton of these just because this is good knitting for when you just need something that doesn't require a whole lot of thinking and you get a really beautiful hat. And my last project is something that is not finished. So it is a work in progress. I'm knitting another pair of socks. These socks are stripy. I haven't woven in this end yet. These are self-striping socks. And the yarn that I'm using is Lang. And I think it's called Jawoll Twin. And so basically, when you use this yarn, if you get 2 skeins of it, you'll end up with 2 identical socks. There's a story. I have a story. Me and yarn stores. So I have this friend who works at the local yarn store, and she invited me to come and knit with them a few months ago. So I snuck away one Saturday after I had been to the Home Depot to get some paint, and I sat down and I was knitting on my Irish socks, and I saw this guy knitting on some socks using this yarn, this Lang yarn, and I thought, oh my gosh, I love the colors. I love like the hints of peach and pink and purple and how they come together. And so I bought a skein of that yarn, a ball of that yarn. And the entire time that he was sitting there knitting with the yarn, he kept saying, I can't believe that it took me one ball of this and I'm making these socks and they're just going forever. They looked like they were going to be like knee-high socks. Maybe not on him because he was really tall, but he kept saying that one ball of this yarn was making him 2 socks. And I knew I was buying it, and I kept looking at the yardage and the grams. It's 50 grams of yarn, is 210 meters. And I could not figure out how he was taking a 50-gram ball of yarn and getting really, really long socks. I couldn't figure it out for the life of me. And I even asked some people there, I'm like, did he really use, I kept asking, did he really use one ball of yarn for those 2 socks? Yeah, they're knee high. So I buy one skein, and I take it home, and I knit this sock, and I start weighing it. And so, because it just kept looking like I wasn't going to have enough. And I felt it the whole time, but yet I still listened to them when I bought that one ball of yarn. So I ended up weighing this sock, and it weighs 33 grams. And the yarn that I had left to knit with weighed 19 grams. And I know I'm a teacher, but I'm not real good at math, y'all. But that math didn't math for me. It wasn't mathing. I knew that I could not knit an entire another sock with only this amount of yarn. So after weighing, obviously that doubt was confirmed, and I'm going to have to go back and purchase, hopefully if they have it, another ball of this yarn. And if they don't have it, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to be really sad. But that's just another situation where I know the people at the yarn store they have the best intentions, but I really should listen to my intuition. Trust my intuition when it comes to especially sock knitting, because I have most experience with sock knitting. I've weighed my yarn. I know how much I need, and I should have just listened to my gut. So I plan to go to the yarn store today. I actually have the time to do that. And I'm going to get some yarn for my next garment. And then I'll also see if they have another ball of this so that I can knit the other sock to this pair. So these are my laying socks. All right. And those are all the finished objects and works in progress that I have to share with you. And the only other thing to talk about is the next project that I want to knit. So the next project that I want to knit is actually the Air Tee by Ysolda. And I'll show you a picture. It's called the Air Tee. I want to knit the Air Tee because I would really love to knit something this summer as the summer ends and we start thinking about fall. I would really like to have something to knit this summer that I can wear now. I can wear these sweaters in the house that I just finished because my husband freezes me in this house, but I'd like to be able to wear my knits outside. So I want to knit a tee. And then I'll go back to sweaters for the fall. And this is the perfect tee for me because I just love the way it fits, everyone that I've seen who knit it. And the first person that I saw who knit it was, what's her name? She has a podcast called Arroyo Knits and Pearls. And I just tend to love the items that she picks out for herself and the way they fit on her. So I saw her wearing it. And the reason that she picked it, I imagine, is because of the length of the sleeves. She talks about in her podcast sometimes about how she's not really comfortable with the way her arm looks and her arms looking like with shorter sleeves or tanks. And I'm very similar to that. So what I love about this tee is that the sleeves they hit about right here. And I love tees that come to that length. So I'm going to knit this one. And as soon as I get done with this podcast, I'm going to run over to the yarn store and grab the yarn for that project. And I'm ready with, I'm armed with knowledge about the yarn that I want so that I can trust my gut when picking out my yarn. And the pattern calls for you to use a blend of cotton and wool. So that's what I'm going to go with. Even though Superwash, when I went with the Superwash yarn for this sweater, it ended up fine. Obviously, I don't want 100% wool in a sweater that I want to wear this summer, so the cotton and the wool blend makes the most sense for this tee. And that is what I will be knitting on for the next month or so. Who knows how long it will take me, and I can't wait to share that tea with you when I see you again. And speaking of when I will see you again, we're ending the podcast now, so if all you wanted to hear about was the knitting, you're welcome to go. Thank you for coming. I'll see you next time. But in terms of the schedule for this knitting podcast, I had high hopes when I started it of recording a podcast every month. But like I said, I want my knitting to be for enjoyment, and I don't want it to be a point of stress for me. Let me get this done so I can have something to share on my podcast each month. That's just not realistic for me in the season of life that I'm in right now. So I might record a podcast once every season, quarterly, and that's okay for me. I might record a podcast as I finish a major project, which for me, the next one will be the Air Tea by Ysolda. And if I don't have time to do that, I'm not going to beat myself up about that. I am going to put first things first, as I like to say. And the first thing in my life right now is God and my family, and then my work. So those things have to come first, and then comes knitting. So I will podcast whenever I can podcast, and that's okay. I think it's really wonderful for people who can do it. Some people do it weekly, some people do it bi-weekly, some people do it monthly, and that might not be the case for me. And I have to be okay with that, and I hope that you are too. Thank you for staying with me. Thank you for sticking around, coming back, staying to the end, all that good stuff. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.